The ocean, vast, silent, and powerful, hides memories older than humanity itself. Sometimes it reminds us just how small we really are. On a quiet July night in 1958, deep within the wilderness of Alaska, the sea rose up with a vengeance. What began as a calm evening turned into one of the most violent natural events ever witnessed by humankind. In a remote inlet surrounded by steep cliffs, a wave taller than the Empire State Building exploded from the water and tore through the land with unimaginable force. Few saw it, and even fewer survived to tell what happened. This is the story of the Lituya Bay Mega Wave. The night Alaska faced the largest tsunami in recorded history. Lituya Bay lies along the rugged southeast coast of Alaska, a narrow fjord stretching 6 miles long and 2 miles wide. To most, it was an unknown place, a small, sheltered bay hidden between mountains and glaciers. But for local fishermen, it was a haven: calm waters, rich salmon runs, and breathtaking views of nature untouched by time. In the summer of 1958, the days were long and bright as the northern sun barely dipped below the horizon. The air was still, the water mirror smooth, and everything seemed eternal. No one, in those quiet hours, could have imagined the destruction that would follow. High above the bay loomed the Fairweather Mountains, towering peaks carved by glaciers and time. Deep beneath them lay a fault line, one of the most active in North America, where the Pacific Plate grinds endlessly against the North American Plate. For centuries, that fault had been silent, storing energy in the dark. On the night of July 9, 1958, at exactly 10:16 p.m., that silence broke. The earth shuddered violently as a magnitude 7.8 earthquake struck, its shock waves echoing through the mountains. Trees swayed and cracked, cliffs shivered, and then high on a mountainside above the bay, the unthinkable happened. A section of rock nearly half a mile wide tore loose and plunged down into the narrow fjord below. In seconds, 90 million tons of stone crashed into the water, falling from a height of over 3,000 feet. The force of the impact displaced almost the entire bay at once. The water, trapped in the narrow channel, had nowhere to go but up. Within moments, it rose higher and higher until the ocean itself seemed to stand upright. The wave that formed that night reached an astonishing 1,720 feet high, taller than the Empire State Building in New York City. For a few terrifying seconds, nature broke its own rules. Then gravity took hold, and the wave came crashing down. The destruction that followed was beyond comprehension. The massive surge tore trees from mountainsides, noped soil and rock away, and stripped the land bare. Entire forests disappeared in an instant, leaving behind smooth, lifeless stone. The roar of the water drowned out everything, the sound of a world being reshaped. But in the midst of that chaos, there were people, ordinary men who had come to the bay that summer to fish, who suddenly found themselves face to face with one of the most powerful natural forces ever recorded. Among them was a man named Howard Ulrich, a fisherman who had brought his 7-year-old son, Sonny, with him for the season. They were anchored near the mouth of Lituya Bay when the earthquake hit. At first, Howard thought it was just another tremor until he heard the sound from deep within the mountains. A low rumble grew into a deafening roar, and as he looked toward the head of the bay, he saw something he couldn't comprehend. In his words, it looked like the whole mountain had just slid into the sea. Moments later, he saw the water rising, not like a normal wave, but a moving wall, glowing faintly in the moonlight, racing toward them with terrifying speed. Ulrich had no time to think. He started the engine and turned toward the open sea, but it was too late. The wave struck, lifting his 40-foot boat like a leaf. For a few moments they were airborne, riding on top of the surge. Somehow, the vessel stayed upright. As it was battered, shaken, thrown across the bay, carried nearly 2 miles by the wave. When it was over, Ulrich and his son were alive but still floating on a sea that no longer looked the same. Everything around them had changed. Where there had once been forested slopes, there was now only raw, naked rock. The shape of the shoreline itself had shifted. Another fishing boat, belonging to William and Vivian Swanson, was anchored closer to the head of the bay. They too felt the earthquake and saw the mountain collapse. Their boat was caught in the first surge. William managed to survive, clinging to debris in the freezing water, but his wife, Vivian, was never found. In total, only 3 people in the world saw the Lituya Bay Mega Wave with their own eyes and lived to describe it. Their testimonies would later help scientists understand the unimaginable scale of that night. When the first rescue and survey teams arrived days later, they were stunned. The destruction defied belief. Trees had been stripped away up to a height of 1,720 feet along the slopes, the highest wave run-up ever recorded on Earth. The bay's landscape had been completely transformed. The entry to the fjord had widened, new sandbars had formed, and the once protected waters now bore scars that would last for centuries. It looked as though a giant hand had scraped the earth clean. Scientists began to study the event, and what they discovered was even more fascinating. This wasn't a traditional tsunami caused by a distant earthquake or seafloor movement. It was something far rarer, a displacement wave. A mega wave created when an enormous mass of rock suddenly falls into a confined body of water. Over the years, researchers found evidence that Lituya Bay had experienced similar events before. Geological records revealed that massive waves had swept through the bay in 1854, 1936, and possibly centuries earlier. The shape of the fjord, narrow, steep, and deep, made it a perfect amplifier for such destruction. It was as if the land itself was designed to create chaos when disturbed. The 1958 wave, however, was by far the largest and most violent. To this day, no other natural wave has reached a comparable height. Scientists struggled to explain just how the wave could reach so high. In the 1990s and 2000s, computer simulations finally provided answers. When 90 million tons of rock strike a confined body of water at nearly 100 miles per hour, the energy released is equivalent to a small atomic bomb. The impact creates a massive upward surge, a vertical explosion of water. Because the bay was narrow, the force had nowhere to disperse, so it climbed the opposite slope, scraping everything in its path. Within seconds, the wave transformed from a rising wall to a racing torrent, sweeping across the bay with terrifying speed. What makes the event even more haunting is how easily it could happen again. Lituya Bay remains geologically unstable. The same fault line still runs beneath it, and the mountains are constantly shifting. Each year, small landslides occur, harmless on their own, but reminders of the power that lies waiting. In 2015, a similar, though smaller, landslide in Greenland created a wave nearly 300 feet high, a chilling echo of Alaska's forgotten disaster. Yet despite its magnitude, the 1958 mega wave is rarely mentioned outside of scientific circles. It sits quietly in archives and old newspapers, overshadowed by more recent tragedies. But to those who survived, it was more than a record-breaking event. It was an encounter with something beyond human comprehension. Howard Ulrich never forgot what he saw that night. Years later, he described the silence that followed a silence. So deep, it felt like the world itself was catching its breath after witnessing its own fury. Today, Lituya Bay is calm again. The water reflects the sky like glass, and the mountains stand motionless as if nothing ever happened. But if you look closely, you can still see the evidence. High above the water line, there's a wide, pale scar, the path where the wave stripped everything away in 1958. Trees have slowly begun to grow back, but the mark remains, etched into the earth, as a permanent reminder of that night. It is nature's signature proof of the moment when the sea rose higher than the sky. The story of Lituya Bay is not just about destruction, it's about perspective. A reminder that even in an age of science and technology, there are forces far beyond our control. In the blink of an eye, the calmest place on Earth can become the most violent. Mountains can fall, oceans can rise, and somewhere, deep beneath the surface, the planet is still moving, still breathing, still capable of unimaginable power. As we remember that night, in 1958, we are left with a haunting truth. Sometimes, the greatest disasters happen in places no one sees, witnessed only by the land itself. Lituya Bay may seem quiet today, but the memory of that wave, the one that touched the sky, still lingers beneath its waters. And in that silence, the earth is simply waiting for its next breath.